Researching buildings is something I love to do. It's great to have made a career out of it. Sharing my love of research and old buildings is always a treat. So without further ado, I just thought we'd start with before you begin research checklist. These may be really obvious or not, but they help you kind of put you in a direction when you're going out to research. First, figure out what kind of information you need to find for the building you're researching. You know, the year built, architect, architectural style, who and what is associated with the building, if that's applicable, and how long was this association. These last two bullets are particularly significant if you're looking at cultural history and trying to convey cultural significance, because many times the building may not be architecturally significant or pretty in a more colloquial way, but significant for the history that happened there. And there are cases to be made for those kinds of buildings as well. And the preservation field is moving more and more towards recognizing sites of cultural significance and not just great works of architecture. And then you want to ask yourself what resources and repositories out there will potentially provide the information that I'm looking for, which I'm going to go into some examples, but there are many out there. And then if it's helpful to put together a checklist to help you organize your search. But the thing about research and researching the past is that it can be very organic. You can find a contact or a resource that brings to light new information that takes you in a totally different direction. So it's helpful to have a checklist as a guide, but knowing that you never know where you might end up, which is one of the fun parts of research. So I thought I would start with looking at what our New York City agencies provide us with as far as research records. And I'm told that this presentation will be available after, so there's quite a bit.
We will put this up online at some point.
Okay, yeah. Okay. So if there's information on here that if I go a little fast, it'll be available. So I want to start with kind of the gatekeeper to research in New York City is finding your block and lot number. A block and lot number, every single property in the city has one. It's a unique number. There could be many 30 Broadways or 30 East whatevers in all 5 boroughs, but there's only one, block 3, lot 10. There could be those in all 5 boroughs, but then each borough has a unique number assigned to it. It's a little complicated, but it's just very helpful to be able to find an address, particularly if it's a big building that may have many different numbers associated with it and many different streets. There's only one block and lot. So if you go to the Department of Buildings website at nyc.gov/buildings, on the homepage is a buildings information tab, which I've marked with a red box here. You'll enter the house number of the building. So if we did 232 for this building, and then street name East 11th Street, and from boroughs we would select Manhattan, and then hit go. It would take us to this page, which is actually not this building, but no, it is this building, I'm sorry, it is. And so you'll see that there's a lot of information up here that you may or may not need, but up in the top right is tax block and tax lot. So for this property, it's block 466, lot 25. So that's really important for you to keep in mind. You'll note that it's noted with landmark status. It has landmark up there. Many times it has what the use is of the building, church, synagogue. Obviously this is not currently a church, but it's associated with the church next door and owned by the church. And then actions down here. There are multiple items here that can be useful. One of the first things you might want to check is to find the building's what's called new building number. And there's a drop down, a list of actions that you can select. NB for new building, or ALT for alterations, to help figure out what changes have been made to the building over time. And if you get quick at this, you can also just type NB or ALT or anything else that you're looking for. Those are the two prominent, most often, the ones you use most often. And this is what I meant when it's going to take you to a building. That's not this building. I entered in a block and lot and was at the page I was at before, and then selected NB. And for this property, it comes up, actually there's two different new buildings, which is a little confusing, but for this particular property, it's NB 183-77 with an asterisk. And DOB places an asterisk next to numbers that denotes it was 1877, not 1977. It's not always accurate, and actually it's very confusing because over there it says 1977. So the computer, whatever they do, it needs to be fixed. But you basically have that. That's what tells you. Now we've moved into a new century, so that gets a little bit more complicated. But for the purposes of building research, right now you're probably going to be doing 19 or 18. And DOB only goes back to 1866 because that's when the department was founded. So armed with this NB number, you can find out various things. Sometimes the DOB search doesn't pop up, doesn't have an NB number or alts for whatever reason. There are other ways that you can find them. One really important resource is the Municipal Archives, which is downtown, right across from City Hall. And it's a beautiful building at that. And it provides many different things. And I've just pulled out some things that you might want to consider, but there's also a reference desk there where they can help guide you. Docket books are on microfilm. These list every single new building and alteration permit in number order. And when you look through them and you have your NB number or your alt number, you can find the architect, the date, owner, size, materials that were used to construct the building, and so on and so forth. And if you don't have an NB or an alt number, each of these dockets has an index at the beginning that you can search for that way. And it's also helpful if you don't have an NB number to get a general idea of the build year. This way you don't have to look through every single index by year, because that could be quite exhausting. You can look through atlases, which I'm going to show in a bit, or use your eye to be like, well, that kind of looks like a Victorian building, so that's probably 1880s, 1890s, so maybe I'll look in that area and start from there. The Municipal Archives also has original Department of Building forms for buildings on blocks south of 39th Street in Manhattan. So that's really helpful if you're in Manhattan in those locations. But they're really great folders just with all these different forms to help you look at alterations to the building over time and when the building was constructed. And it's helpful if you want to see these, you need to request them by phone or email by each Wednesday, and they should be ready by late morning of that Friday. And they'll hold it for you. Tax records are also really useful for buildings that were constructed before DOB was formed in 1866. That's a bit of a lengthier process of explaining what a tax record is and how you do the research. But if you go to the reference desk, they'll assist you. I've never used birth, marriage, and death certificates for my research, but it could be helpful. And tax photographs, which I'm going to get to in a bit, is really helpful. The city had photographers take photos of every single lot in the 5 boroughs from 1939 to 41, and then again in 83 to 88. It's sad to say that the photos from 39 to 41 are much better quality than the ones from the 80s, but so it goes. And I just found out that the 39 to 41 photos have just been made available online, which is really exciting.
And if you're on the HDC mailing list, we sent out an email this afternoon that will give you a link to that.
Yeah, it's like a field day. These are invaluable in telling the histories of your buildings, and because it's also before it's the post-World War II era when a lot of construction and alteration started happening. So it's really a snapshot of what New York looked like just before all that. Another agency is the New York Housing and Preservation Development, which they have online iCards or improvement cards. And these are really invaluable when you're doing tenement research in particular, because they have these cards that show, it's kind of faded here, but this is a floor plan of a tenement. And it has, LR, so living room, bedroom. There's the shared hall and the stairwell. So it's just really helpful to figure out what the interior layout is of the building. And then it also provides materials. So anytime a surveyor went into the building, they would note what it looked like, and the original card would have, and other cards would have the materials. So this is just another option, and it's also, as I said, available online, so that's really great. The Department of Finance on John Street is really helpful if you want to figure out building ownership through the years, and they also have deed conveyance records. It helps who may have lived in the building and when, but keep in mind it could also be a building owner and not a tenant. So it's not useful in that respect, but if it's a house, that would be useful, most likely. So once again, you'd have the block and lot number at your side to help you find the right book you're looking for. They go all the way back to the 17th century, which is quite extraordinary, up to about 1960, and then after that time, they're online, which is convenient, but not as cool as the dockets. They're quite amazing pieces of history. Again, it's helpful to know the estimated build year, so you're not searching every single book. And of course, the Landmarks Commission has useful records if your building is a landmark. They also have a survey wing for non-designated buildings, and they have files that you can go in and research. You have to make a request. So they may have done surveys of neighborhoods or landmarks, of individual buildings, but never moved on them as far as designation. But that history is there and available. I think they've made it a bit harder to do this in recent years, but it is public access. But this map is available on their website, on their homepage. And I just pulled it up here to show you, this is a great way to see if the building you're researching is already a landmark or an historic district. So historic districts are marked in yellow here. The pink is individual landmarks, and then there are two other colors for scenic and interior landmarks. If you click on any one of these, it'll bring up an information box and a link to that building's designation report. And if you're not familiar, a designation report is the Landmarks Commission's official history of the building, why it was significant, a description of the building, kind of their regulatory tool, which is very useful for researchers going forward. They, of course, also have designation reports available online, which is really helpful. The Neighborhood Preservation Center here also has a database for these designation reports. So if your building happens to be located in a historic district or is an individual landmark, these date back to the mid-1960s, but until about the late 70s maybe, or the early 80s, they're very sparse. They're very short. The Brooklyn Heights Historic District is 1 page long. Yeah, Greenwich Village Historic District, designated in '69, is a bit more extensive, luckily, and they have information about each building. But the ones today are very in-depth. And historic district designation report, like this one for Crown Heights North, there's a whole history of the neighborhood to put it in context, what was happening there. And then each building in the middle here, it's kind of hard to see, but this is the table of contents where you can see where your building is. And you can go to that page and they'll have the owner history, the very basic information like build year, architect, any bits of significance that they may have found, and the sources they used. But as we were talking before, the staff there, there are many buildings within a historic district, and if you took the time to research in depth every single one of those buildings, the district would just never get designated. It takes so long. So there's always more information that you can find. So this isn't by all means the end point. The Landmarks Commission, if you're not as familiar or comfortable in identifying styles, particularly of row houses in New York, they've provided this row house manual that is available online. And it goes through the styles of row houses from the Federal Revival up until 20th century styles. And again, it's hard to see here, but they have checkpoints. Like, here are some character defining features of these styles to know what to look for, and this is when the style was popular. It by no means that a Greek revival was only built in the 1830s, 40s. in other parts of the city, it may, if someone decided like, I want Greek revival. So it doesn't necessarily mean 1830s, 1840s, for example, but it's a very good indicator. And that's also helpful, this is helpful if you're standing in front of a building and you can kind of match it. And if you don't know the build year, you could get, you're like, well, yeah, you could get pretty close. So other valuable researching tools moving beyond city agencies. Newspapers are, again, invaluable. ProQuest is available through the New York Public Library and other public libraries for free. They provide access to the New York Times, the New York Tribune, the Wall Street Journal, New Amsterdam News, which was an African-American newspaper, and many others. It's just, there are different keywords that you can use to find information if you go by the address, and you need to do kind of different things. So like for this building, you could do 232 East 11th, but you should also try 232 E.11th or 232, and so don't give up if your address just as you entered it doesn't show up, or to see if there's an alternate address like 234. Or if you happen to know someone associated with the building, or just any kind of information. It's amazing if you get creative with your search, what pops up. The Brooklyn Public Library has the Brooklyn Daily Eagle digitized, which covers Brooklyn and parts of elsewhere in the city. What I love about this one is that they actually highlight the keywords that you've searched for. So if you did a search for, Chuck Jones or whatever, and the sources, articles pop up, you click on that article and Chuck Jones is highlighted in yellow. Because sometimes you can find a page full of ads, and like 50 ads, and you're like, where you literally have to look at every single thing. So that's really great that they do that. Google also provides Google Books, which I'm sure you're familiar with. It's like books.google.com. Again, if you try different searches, I've found really like some rare books or books that you can eventually find in libraries, but they provide enough of a preview that gives you an idea of what you want to find. And sometimes it provides even more of a preview. So that's a really great source. And Google has also digitized many editions of the Village Voice. So if you're doing research downtown, that's really helpful. These are two clips that I've pulled from the Village Voice. They were helpful to me in researching the Cafe Chino. And then FultonHistory.com is this quirky site. It's someone just amassed a huge database of newspapers from all over the US and Canada, including ones in Queens that I just used recently to do some research in Jackson Heights for this really nondescript building. I was like, I'm never gonna find anything on this building. And then I saw ads that it was a funeral parlor, and then it was a real estate office, just for these local Queens and Long Island newspapers.
And just by keying in the address, they popped up?
Yeah. So doing creative things with the address, or again, if you know information of someone's name. And sometimes if you find the address, that you read the article, there's a name associated with the article, so you're like, okay, I'm gonna try that name now. And it kind of takes you in many different directions. Census records are really helpful, particularly if you're doing research in tenement districts and you kind of want to find out the context of what kind of ethnic groups may have been living there at that time. So here in the East Village, you could be looking at a number of tenements and you're like, wow, there's a lot of German Jewish immigrants in this particular block, or there are many different like Polish immigrants, because the census, which is provided on ancestry.com for free, because it's expensive otherwise, for free at the public library. You can search by address and or by person's name. It's usually, the person's name is usually a bit more helpful, but the address is also possible. And anyone familiar with these old census records, they provide many different things like sex, race, national origin, the origin of the parents, which is particularly helpful if this was an immigrant neighborhood, age, occupation. It's like, oh wow, there are a lot of people working in the garment district in this building. That's really interesting, and from and of German Jewish descent. For the United States Census are available right now up until 1940, and 1950 will open up in about 2022, so about 72 years each one opens up. And it's always a really exciting moment when 1940 opened up in 2012. And we're getting even closer, actually, to when our relatives were around. And so everything but the 1890 census for New York City is available, because that one, unfortunately, was lost to fire. Another important resource is the New York State Census, available for the years 1905, 1915, and 1925 for New York County, aka Manhattan. And then other years are available for the other counties of New York. And then the entire state is available in 1925. And this is really useful if you're in a building, researching a building, and you're trying to find when an individual was living there. There was someone in Harlem that I was researching, and I saw that he was there in 1920, and he wasn't there in 1930. So I said, okay, and then I looked at 1925, and he was still there. So that actually helped. I was like, okay, sometime between 25 and 30, he left. So it helps you narrow the gap. And this is also just really interesting on your own, for your own family's history. You could really get lost in those records. And then photo collections around the city many of them are digitized, which is also really helpful in telling the story of a building, not just for the way it looks, but perhaps there's a sign in the window that tells you what kind of business was there at that time. Or it gives you a context for what the neighborhood looked like, or the buildings just on either side of it. Sometimes the building you're looking for is actually in the building, a photograph that's focusing on the building next door. Your building is like right over here. So if you're next to a more well-known building, search that building. You might see your building right next to it. So the New York Public Library has the digital collection, and they have much more, obviously, in their branches, but this is really valuable. They also, this guy in San Francisco did something similar for the San Francisco Public Library. He came here and did this project with the New York Public Library, which is amazing. He tied many of the photographs in the collection, geospatially or whatever the term is, to their locations, where they are. So if you click on any of these dots, so I click on one dot, it brings up all the photographs that New York Public Library has digitized for that one location. So it's crazy. So this one is Lexington Avenue, East Side, from 28th to 29th Streets. I'm sorry, this is Lexington Avenue and 28th Street. This particular building is of the location I just said. It's amazing. I walked by an old building in Astoria. I'd walked by a million times, and I was like, that building has been really altered. I was like, that building looks like it was something back in the day. And I went to this website, clicked on the intersection, found it. It was this beautiful old farmhouse in a large estate. So this is really cool.
Are you talking about, I think it's Urban Archive is the app.
So I'm glad you said that. Yeah, that's a different company, that's a different organization. We work with them. I'm glad you brought that up, because I didn't mention them here, but Urban Archive is an app. They've worked with a lot of the major institutions, New York Historical Society, New York Public Library, Museum of the City of New York, Brooklyn Historical, GVSHP upstairs, et cetera, et cetera. You can click on locations, and all the photos they have for that particular building will pop up, and they have basic information, and you can also turn on your location and notifications. If you're walking by, it'll say like, hey, you're walking past a really cool building. They're really great. So that's a great resource.
It's Urban Archive?
Urban Archive, yeah. And they have a website, even though it's app-based. So another photograph collection that's really extensive is New York Historical Society on Central Park West, in person and online, keeping in mind that in person you're going to find much more. And the tax photos that I alluded to earlier, so invaluable. This is the residence of Jerome Robbins, the choreographer. And this photo over here is what it looks like today. And I just wanted to see, it was like, well, is this what it looked like? He lived in the building until the late 1990s. So I wanted to see, how close is this to what it was when he lived here? Because that's important. So you can see the cornice has been added after. This is the mid-'80s photo. This is from circa 1939. The cornice is new. The windows have been changed. The molding above the second floor has, there's been some cosmetic changes to the building, but the massing is overall the same. The fenestration pattern, so the windows and doors are still there. So it depends on how you build your argument, but given that Jerome Robbins himself was so significant in theater history, this is a building that you could make an argument still for cultural significance. Other archives for historic New York City photos, it's endless, but here are some. I tried to get some examples, major examples in all the boroughs. Brooklyn Historical has Brooklyn and Long Island. You'll see that in Brooklyn and Queens. They also have Long Island photos because historically they were part of Long Island. And so the Brooklyn Public Library also has an extensive collection. Basically, these are public libraries and historical societies in each area. And the LaGuardia and Wagner archives at LaGuardia Community College in Long Island City is a resource I recently came across. And this is really useful for Queens-based history. And you'll find that local historical societies, like this Greater Astoria Historical Society, there's one in many different areas of the city, in these more localized societies that you'll find information. And of course, there's sites like the Library of Congress, which they have an extensive collection as well. And being in New York City, you may find something you're looking for there. I think we're fortunate in many ways for New York City being on the map elsewhere. Yeah, so we can share that later. And then there are many directories that you can also use. A lot of these are available at New York Public or Brooklyn Public, or Ancestry.com has portions of these. The city directories help list residents, their address and their occupation and their place of work, so you're getting to know a bit more about the people who lived in these buildings, obviously important for cultural histories. They are published every year from the 18th century until well into the 20th century. Business directories are also helpful. The reverse directories are really great because they are organized by address. So if you have your building, but you don't know who lived there, you can look up your address, and then you'll see in that year who was living at that address. So. And then maps and atlases are also really important in helping you see what the building looked like, the footprint. I'm going to show you an insurance map in a bit, but here's where you can find them. New York Public Library has a really wonderful map division on the first floor, so when you get in to the building, you go to the right, all the way down the hall, and then to your right, there's the map division, all these great atlases, and then each of these in the other boroughs has them as well. And so here's an example of a fire insurance map. Has anyone seen these before? Okay, you're familiar. So for those of you who aren't, each of them has a key, so you can tell what these colors mean and the numbers on them. In this case, the pink-red color, it means a brick construction, and then the yellow means wood. So that's it's a wood rear addition or a wood porch of sorts. And then obviously this is this block. So we have St. Mark's Church right there, and we're right next to it. Right here's the rectory. Oops, sorry. And then each lot itself. So you can see in the center, there's 466, that's the block. And then each lot has the number of, each lot has its number on its side. So you can see, it's a little hard, but on a diagonal. So on the rectory, there's 25. And then the underline is the number of floors. So this one is 2B, which means 2 floors with a basement. And so you can see the footprint, which is really helpful. And this is from 1916, but you can see them from many other years. So you can see how a building has changed or how the street has changed, because sometimes these are demolished, lots are combined, additions are put on in the back. So it's a really great overview of what the neighborhood looked like. And look at this little Stuyvesant alley right there. That's no longer there, but there's like a hint of it still there if you look closely.
And what source did you get this from?
This is from the New York Public Library. They have a bunch of links from all 5 boroughs on there, but they have a much more extensive collection in the map division. The fire insurance maps are also another important resource if the building has gone condo, and it usually has a 4-digit lot number. It goes from, say, block 466, lot 23 to lot 7501. So if you're doing research with historic records, 7501 won't get you anywhere because those records know it as 26. So it is helpful if you come across a lot number like that, a condo, to go find its historic lot number. And then this really great resource, if you're looking, researching buildings in Manhattan from 1900 to 1986, Christopher Gray, who passed away earlier this year, sadly, has this office for Metropolitan History. And if you have your NB number that I mentioned earlier, you can do a search. I just randomly put in the year 1944 and the number 34, which means it was the 34th application filed for a new building in 1944. And you can see how it reads. They do 34, the 34th permit of 1944. That's how you would interpret that. And then, so I just entered those 2 bits of information, clicked search records, and it came back to me with 810 to 812 Madison Avenue, which cost $45,000 to build, a 15-story brick penthouse, apartments and stores, 95 feet. And so it also mentions the owner and the owner address, and then the architect and architect address. H.I. Feldman pops up a lot. So this is a really great resource for those years and in Manhattan. And then, as I mentioned before, just being proactive and finding archives, photo collections, organizations, community groups, museums, universities, historical societies, et cetera, et cetera. When you have a building and you're starting to find more information about it, go to the neighborhood where it is, or do research. HDC has really great connections all over the city to local community groups working in those neighborhoods. They may know of resources. There may be a specific historical society or such that could help you. So I just listed some here. Obviously, the Schomburg Center is one of the 4 main research libraries of the New York Public Library, so it's a big deal. But if you're looking specifically for African American culture and history, that's probably the first stop. I included something like Lesbian History Archives because it's very localized. It's located in Park Slope, so if you're doing a history of lesbian-related history, you might contact them. The David McReynolds photography is just photography collections. I was doing research on a Jewish activist who is not really well known, but was part of the War Resisters League. So I just happened to do his name and War Resisters League, and I came across David McReynolds' photos. And it was just like a wealth of information, and I contacted them because they don't have everything digitized. And it really helped me figure out more about this activist that I was researching, what buildings he was tied to. And then the LaGuardia and Wagner Archives, as I mentioned earlier, in Long Island City, is really helpful in Queens-based research. So just examples of how you can kind of fine-tune your research outside of the larger NYC institutions. And then oral histories, particularly if you're doing more histories of the more recent past. Is anyone associated with that property still alive that you can talk to? Are relatives, historians, or unofficial historians? There was a guy who hangs out at this bar, historic bar. He's there all the time, and he's just collected so much information about the history of that space that he helped us in a recent National Register nomination that we put together. So there are people around who love to talk about the buildings that they love so much, or the people who are associated with them. And does a local organization or archive have oral histories? Like, for example, GBSHP upstairs has a lot of oral histories associated with people in downtown, in the village. It's just amazing what kind of information you can get, keeping in mind that when people are remembering things in the past, they may not always remember it correctly, but they do provide a voice. And in my last point, they really help bring the history of a building to life. And especially for readers, I think it's always really moving to hear of people's connections to places. And they may take you in a direction you didn't even realize.
I don't need to, I apologize if this is vague, but I think that the Brooklyn borough has its own official historian.
Yes, all the boroughs do.
Yeah,
Yes,
so
exactly.
I saw some YouTube, it's a real old guy, and his house is like, hooks up to the ceiling.
Yeah.
And he's the official historian of the borough.
Yeah. We gave a presentation for our LGBT project here actually, and the Queensboro historian showed up, and he was there to make sure that we were talking about all 5 boroughs and not just Manhattan. So he was pleased. I'm glad I included some Queens-related sites. Yes, but that's another great resource. So now that we have examples, I thought I would provide a case study to put some of these resources in place. And for that, I'm going to go with the Cafe Chino because it's something I did somewhat recently and touches on a lot of these things. I just going to give you just a brief background on what Cafe Chino was. So it was located on Cornelia Street in Greenwich Village from 1958 to 1968. It was a cafe theater owned by Joe Chino, who's the man in the back there, and he's talking to a director, a young director, and it became the birthplace of Off Broadway, and was also important in the development of gay theater and support of gay playwrights in an era when depicting homosexuality on stage was illegal, and it was an important pre-Stonewall space. So here you could see inside the cafe, it was a very modest location, and it was where this experimental theater was performed. This is an actress performing, there's no stage yet. Well, the stage was always temporary anyway, but she's performing in a very intimate space. And here are some performers in a play, The Madness of Lady Bright. So in determining cultural significance, or significance in general, you can research and write a historical narrative that tells the history of the property. That's relatively straightforward. But then you have to go further. It's easy to say this building was A, B, and C, but explain to the reader or a reviewer, if you're trying to list something, why was it significant? And some of the things that you want to ask yourself, is the building associated with a notable person or group? Is it a site of an important past event or events? Is it a rare example of a style of architecture if you're going for architectural significance? Is it the first example or the last surviving example of a type, so culturally or architecturally? Maybe it's the last tenement building we have that housed a certain group of people in a certain profession. And that's important, even if the architecture, tenements on their own usually aren't architecturally significant because they were just all over the place and built in rows. But those are kind of different angles you can go with. And depending on the kind of project you're dealing with, you need to establish a period of significance. Even if you don't formally need to do it, it helps just for your own purposes. Like, what years do I need to research? Okay, so, I think this person was around from the 1860s to the 1940s, so I'm going to focus my research those years. Especially if you're looking at newspapers, you can kind of, cap your research. And then you also need to determine integrity. This is varying degrees. You really need to determine integrity if you're going for a designation or official recognition. But it's also helpful if you're documenting the history of a space to record what it looked like, interior and exterior, and ask yourself, would it be recognizable to the people associated with it? It doesn't necessarily have to be architecturally significant. One example we always refer to is Stonewall. It's not a pretty building. It's not architecturally significant on its own, but if the people involved in the uprising in '69 were standing in front of it, they would recognize it, and that's very important. Same thing with Cafe Chino, which I'll show in a bit. So just because we listed it for the National Register, if you were pursuing a National Register listing, these are the kinds of things that you would have to emphasize. There are different kinds of criteria. We nominated it in the area of events that have made a significant contribution to the broad patterns of our history. If it's associated with a notable person, that'd be criterion B. so on and so forth. And then there are different areas of significance that the National Park Service provides for you to select from. So for this one, we did performing arts and social history. And then you need to establish a period of significance, which we did with the cafe's years of operation. Again, this is a more formal approach to research and writing. So physical integrity and building description. Obviously, we're dealing with buildings, so we have to record what it looked like. We're not dealing with history in an abstract sense. So as I said, would this building be recognizable to Joe Chino, the owner, and those associated with the cafe today? I'll show you what the whole building looks like today, but the storefront, even though it has changed a little bit, the massing is the same. We were going for cultural significance in this case, so as long as we can get some kind of idea that it looks as it did, we're good to go. So that was the case here. Here is where I used the circa 1939 tax photo to determine what the building looked like in the past versus today. As you can see, the upper floors, not much has changed at all. And the ground floor, the massing is still, it was a storefront, it's a storefront today, it was a storefront in the Chino years, and you get a sense of the neighborhood as well. And then I also used a fire insurance map like we looked at before because I wanted to get a sense of the neighborhood. This is from the 1950s. Some of them are more colorful than others, more visually engaging. Luckily, this one is for this purpose. But here we have Cornelia Street on the bottom, and 31 is towards the left side of the block. But it also gives you idea of the other blocks, and that this was a very heavy tenement district. As far as the building type. So when you're talking about the setting and giving context to your building, you can talk about the neighborhood and how it looked like through insurance maps. And it's also important to document the space by going in, if possible, and understanding what happened where. I was fortunate to be able to work with Maggie Dominic here, who was associated with the Cafe Chino and is that unofficial historian I talked about before, someone who just started collecting everything she could after the Chino years. And so here she's going with me through the space. I'm drawing this very informal floor plan, not to scale, but it helped give me an idea when I was doing the building description and to help me see the history as I was looking at photos and listening to people talk about the space. I said, okay, so the stage was here, there were just cafe tables all over the place. There was a cigarette machine. She talked about when the room was full, there would only be seating on the cigarette machine. So it kind of helps bring the building to life in that way. And then the iCard I mentioned before from the HPD is useful in helping me see what the floor plan was. This is actually the same card I shared before. This is the floor plan of 31 Cornelia in the 1910s, I believe. There's several that I picked. So it just helped me document the upper floors since I can't get up there because they're private apartments. And it may not look this way today, but it helped show what it kind of looked like historically. And then when I was looking for the build year and the architect and all that, I cheated. I used the LPC designation report. I knew that this was in a historic district. That's why it's really useful if you're doing research on a building, check if it's a landmark first, because someone may have already done the research for you. But if not, I would have gone through DOB, gone to the Municipal Archives, found the information that way. But there's no need to reinvent the wheel if they've already done it for you. Photographing is a really important part of documenting a building. We need to know what it looks like today and moving forward. And so you'll find aspects of the building you wish you hadn't seen, like the restaurant, the kitchen of this abandoned restaurant. I'm surprised I've since eaten at other restaurants. It was pretty gritty. But this photo here, you can see that the drop ceiling, we lifted it, and there's these original tiles, really bad shape. There was a fire here in the mid-60s, but there they are. It was still a fun, nerdy moment to find these old tiles. And then, remembering in the village and many areas of the city, you might have back buildings, these tenements that were built on the lot but behind. So, document those. I didn't know at the time if it would be associated with Cafe Chino, so I took photos of it while we had access. And these are just really useful record keepers. And you never know, even if you don't do official listings, someone in the future, if you have a report or if you have just an informal scrapbook of things to say, wow, that's what the building looked like in 2018, because you never know, it may not be there or it may have changed. So it's important. And of course, historic images of the space are really significant. Maggie Dominic was incredible in the way she was able to find all of these photographs and hold on to them. And so that helps you see what the space looked like at the time and documenting it. This little girl with the stroller, with the little stroller is cute. And so when I talked about looking at archives that specifically reference your project, in speaking to Maggie, I knew that she had donated all of her Cafe Chino records to the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts at Lincoln Center. If you're doing any kind of theater or performing arts related research in New York City, go to this library. It's quite extensive. And then the New York University Fales Library has a downtown collection that housed Maggie's works. If I didn't know Maggie, I would have done a search and I would have come across it. Speaking with reference librarians, they know so much more than you ever could. So it's really valuable. And you'll find ephemera and all these things to help tell the story. And obvious, perhaps finding books and online resources. This helps if someone has obviously written about what you're researching. Fortunately, Cafe Chino had a biography on it. And I didn't want to just talk about Cafe Chino in particular. I'm going to go into this in a bit. I wanted to expand on it. Where did it fall in the Off-Broadway movement? So books like this one, Playing Underground, talking about that movement, helped put it in context. And then I also found additional resources, like one of the playwrights associated with the cafe has this WordPress site where he has all of these photos and plays and cataloging. And then because I knew it was associated with gay history, I did some research and found things like this in the Life YouTube video. I mean, YouTube has a lot of great documentaries and clips that are valuable. So moving on just for kind of the tail end of this presentation, putting all of this into practice and how Cafe Chino, how it was significant to the birthplace of Off Broadway and as a pioneer in developing gay theater, because I can't just say that, I have to prove it. So first, grounding it in the Off Broadway movement. When you're doing research on a building, it's in a physical place for a reason. Things happen there for a reason. Why in this neighborhood? Why this time period? Why these people? Why did all this come together in this one moment? Whatever building you're researching, I think is really important to ask yourself those questions. So Greenwich Village, it's the ground zero for the counterculture at this time in the 50s and 60s. Artists here who typically rejected the establishment. And there were different kinds of artists experimenting in coffee houses at the time. All of this set the stage for Cafe Chino and the birth of Off Broadway, because that itself was a rejection of the commercialism of Broadway and even Off Broadway. It was just artists doing their thing for the sake of the art. And Greenwich Village was the perfect platform for that. And then I had to prove that it was the birthplace of Off Broadway. Not just say it again. So looking at that book I mentioned before, looking at 3 other theaters that were significant at that time, comparing it to those, why was this the first? Because not everyone will be an expert in Off Broadway. I myself was not an expert in Off Broadway, so it's helpful to provide that to your reader, to not assume that we all know what you're talking about. And then proving why the Cafe Chino was so unique, as opposed to the other coffee houses happening at that time, staging works at that time. It took its work more seriously. I looked into the counterculture and coffee house culture of Greenwich Village at the time, and many of the coffee houses, particularly along McDougal, were catering more to a tourist crowd. And once that tourism craze died down, they were like, we don't care about the theater. So they didn't really put anything into its development. Cafe Chino, they cared about theater. They kept going. They didn't care about the money. Another reason was that coffee houses in this time period, they were heavily fined, many times because it was noise, but it was also associated with people that residents didn't really care for, one of the outcasts of society, LGBT people, people of color, bohemians, interracial couples, all these kinds of things. So it's interesting to put that into play. As these coffee houses received fines, they often stopped showing plays because they couldn't afford to keep their staff because all their money was going to fines. Cafe Chino, on the other hand, Joe Chino had friends who volunteered without pay. They wanted to create theater, and they would keep it alive no matter what. He found ways to pay off the cops. He had his own job. So it remained open long enough to establish Off Broadway as an art form for people to come see it, for it to be critically reviewed. What they did to keep it alive helped give birth to the movement. And then if you're working on a project like this, you want to document the notable people that are associated with it. These are the many people who are associated with it, including Bernadette Peters, pretty cool, and many other names that are actually really well known in either the theater world, in the theater world, but may not be recognizable to many of us or anyone reading. So if you're doing a space like this, you don't need to write an exhaustive list of every single work or playwright that was associated with it, but pull out significant works. What are some highlights of the space that help drive your narrative? The exhaustive list is for the archive. And then in this case, you may also want to provide short bios to help your reader, especially reviewers at the at the state and national levels. Like, okay, but who is David Starkweather? Who is Tom Ian? And you're like, well, actually, they did some things that. So it's really helpful to help put them in some kind of context for your reader. And then the other element of this cafe, it's important to recognize that buildings can have many different layers of history and not just one narrative. So kind of look at all the different potentials that you can find and explore them. And so in this case, there were the two. I wanted to put gay theater in context. So we looked at 20th century theater and how gay people were portrayed, gay and lesbian figures in particular were portrayed, mostly stereotypically for a long time, or sympathetic works were closed down by censor laws and the police. So Mae West was one person who, it wasn't just gay-themed works that were closed down on Broadway. It was interracial, anything that was not considered moral. And Mae West put together quite a number of performances that ended up with the creation of the Wales Padlock Law in 1927, saying that if you broke any of these morality laws, your play could be shut down. And I just included the Belasco because for the purposes of this report, it was the last theater on Broadway to be affected by this law for the reason of showing a lesbian-themed play. So I also needed to prove, it's an early pioneer in gay theater, but there was actually one happening a bit earlier on Fire Island, and that was Cherry Grove Community House. It was already listed on the National Register. So I had to say, well, actually Cafe Chino was still significant, even though this came along in 1948. And here are the reasons why. Again, so this is just like trying to be more evaluative and not just talking about history. But Cherry Grove, it's on Fire Island, it's more isolated. Theater was only performed there in the summer season. It was for gay theater professionals, so they were looking for a retreat from their work life. So they're looking for more lighthearted fare. At the end of the summer, the stage was gone, and it looked like you're just like a high school auditorium. So I used that to help prove the fact that Cafe Chino itself was a year-round space, performance space. It was centrally located in Greenwich Village, at the time the heart of bohemian and gay life. So it was very easy for people to get to. It was affordable. You only needed to pay a minimum of $1 from the cafe menu, which you could not do in Greenwich Village today. And they showcase serious work from the beginning because these were emerging playwrights who were trying to get their start. So Cherry Grove, you were more vacationing. Cafe Chino, you're like, this is my chance to hone my skills and have it critically reviewed. So these were just arguments that we made. And if you're, in this case, I called out gay-specific works and playwrights. There were two different narratives that was going on, Off Broadway, and then gay theater specific. There's a lot of overlap between the two. Once again, Maggie's archives coming into play with a lot of these pieces. And then oral histories I mentioned earlier. I never got a chance to speak to William Hoffman. He passed away before I started this research, but the YouTube video in the life that I had showed before, there were a number of gay playwrights talking about the importance of the Chino to them. And I just really love this quote because it really talks about the importance of space. Anytime you can find quotes like this where the person is literally telling you, when I walk through these doors, this is how it changes me. I mean, that is cultural significance up the wazoo. Like it's really a powerful, really powerful quote. And then I always find tying history to current themes, if possible, really helps connect your reader and prove your point. Obviously, representation matters is a big thing right now. Cafe Chino was doing this in the 1960s for everyone associated with it, not just gay playwrights. So I really wanted to emphasize that, and I used resources to prove this case. This is an activist, Perry Brass. He would become a gay rights activist after Stonewall, but as a teenager, he came to Cafe Chino, saw a gay-themed play, and as a gay teenager, saw himself reflected in it, and it empowered him and it affected him. So these are kinds of the oral histories that we put together. And then finally, looking beyond the space itself, you don't want to just talk about the building in the time you're recording. You want to, as I said earlier, you want to think about what was happening before and what was happening after, and how your space may have contributed. And obviously this is a very specific case, but you can look at other things. If it was the birthplace of something, what happened afterwards that is credited to the existence of the building you're researching. So in this case, I looked at the impact of Cafe Chino on gay theater by researching gay theater companies and plays that came after it, and seeing what its influence was, and it really helps to tie that in when you're trying to prove significance. And then finally, take your time, fact check, most of all, have fun researching buildings and writing compelling historical narratives, because it's a really fun opportunity to help bring history to life. So, does anyone have any questions? I know some of you may have had specific research questions.
For the Municipal Archives, is that just for Manhattan, or is it all the boroughs?
It has, in person, it has all the boroughs. So the original DOB, Department of Building files, that's just Manhattan, south of 39th Street. But the dockets, those have others. But they're also Department of Buildings in each borough.
Yeah.
So like Brooklyn, which you've probably been to in the basement. I don't know if you've been to in the basement there.
No, the issue I'm thinking of is actually for Queens.
Okay.
But someone told me that there was a fire at the Department of Buildings in Queens, and they don't have the records before 1930 or something.
Oh.
So I didn't know if you knew anything about that, but I just didn't want to go all the way out there.
Yeah, I know, it's on Jamaica. Yeah, it's, or Cupid. I don't know. I could check into that though, because I do know people who would know that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Municipal Archives has, you said below 39?
Mm-hmm.
I do
Yeah.
Harlem, and they have all of Harlem.
I'm talking about the original.
1939 and 1941 shots.
Oh yeah, they have all 5 boroughs. I meant
I think that has Queens too, right?
Yeah, for the tax photos, yes. But what I was talking about was the original forms from the Department of Buildings, the new building permits, and the application, alteration applications. They have those for below 39th.
Okay.
For all others, you'd have to go to the Department of Buildings.
With Stonewall being designated What aspect of it is designated? I mean, I suppose the facade is, but is it always going to have to be the stone wall in? I mean, will that sign always have to be in the window?
No, you can't designate use. And in fact, it was actually, the original stone wall went out of business shortly after the 1969 uprising. And we actually have great photos, speaking of photos telling a story. It became a bagel place, Chinese restaurant, all these. And then Stonewall came back in the 80s under different forms. And it was originally actually in both buildings. Those were horse stable buildings. And it's now just on the left side. But originally, at the time of the uprising, it was in both. But as far as New York, the Landmark Preservation Commission, or National Register, you can't protect the use of the building. So it could become a bank, or
The
something.
landmark designation does give landmarks oversight over all exterior fabric, and that would include
Yeah.
signage, so that they could conceivably
Yeah.
mandate that something like that be preserved.
Sometimes the sign, if it's connected to use, though, they can't protect. And in fact, the beautiful vertical marquee that used to be there, the vertical sign that said Stonewall,
Oh, yeah.
that was taken down in the 70s, and then another one in the 80s.
Landmarks secures the area, not necessarily the sign, right?
Yeah, they designate the lot,
Yeah.
and then sometimes portions of the lot. So so they don't.
I have a building, James Van Der Zee was a photographer, African-American photographer, famous, and we uncovered his sign, but we tried to get landmarks to help us protect the sign, and they said they couldn't.
Yeah.
They were like, no, we can't help you with the sign. So I guess you have to go state or national to protect the sign itself.
Well, the Landmarks Commission is the only regulatory agency, so a state or national register listing is actually mostly honorary, other than federal funds you may tap into for restoration effort.
It took me 3 years. I just got the awning put back, the original awning from 1934, and it took 3 years to fight with landmarks to get it, because they said we don't have anything to do with that.
Yeah.
It was like
I know it can be
It's like
a little bit
the
of
opposite
short.
of what you thought.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, there are some parts of the building they just don't regulate, and it changes sometimes.
So I went to Municipal Archives and then showed them that it was, but it's still not. So I put the awning back up, but it took long, 3 years.
Oh yeah, I know it can be a process.
What was the part you said the national is just honorary?
Yes.
National, what is that?
A listing on the National Register of Historic Places is honorific.
Does it really offer anything?
It doesn't protect the building. No, it's an honor, but you can, if you're considered a contributing building, you can potentially apply for federal funds. But then that's when it becomes regulatory, because you need to put that money into restoring the building.
Okay.
And so that's when you work with them to restore.
Did you get your designation for this?
Yes, it was listed on the National Register, and it's also protected in a local historic district.
Nice.
Yeah.
And the Parks
Which I didn't.
Department oversees it. Isn't there a park ranger in front of the little island?
For Stonewall National Monument?
Yes.
Yes, yeah, there's a park ranger in Christopher Park. Because the National Monument actually it has to be federally owned, and the Stonewall buildings are privately owned. So the city transferred ownership of Christopher Park to the federal government.
Is that the smallest territory that any park ranger oversees?
It might be. That's a good question. Yeah, it might be. It's pretty small.
He's not on a horse house.
No, no.
And once something is landmarked, is there any way to unlandmark it? Is it ever at risk of losing it?
Well, so a building is, when it's landmarked by the Landmarks Preservation Commission, it then goes to City Council, who can unlandmark it. That's why it can be so political. You need to make sure that you have the support of the local council member of that district, and this is what the Landmarks Commission would do.
And even after that, there's a mechanism called a hardship provision in the landmarks law, where you can say, well, maintaining the building in this form, I can't get a certain rate of return on the property. If you can prove that, you can often build or even demolish demolished.
It's always a battle, but the other thing you can do is simply neglect the building. And we
Yeah.
often talk in the board meetings about demolition by neglect.
Right.
And there have been a number of buildings over the years that I've heard described after they have collapsed or been pronounced so dangerous. And I'm just looking, I live near Tammany Hall in Union Square. It looks as if they tore it absolutely down and are rebuilding. So is that not true, Jesse?
I mean, no, but they approved this massive, dome addition on
Leaving
their property.
aside the hideous
I mean,
dome on
they
top.
theoretically were not demolishing and rebuilding, but I mean,
What I couldn't see if there were any walls still standing because they completely fenced over it. The roof was gone for a number of months, but I couldn't see if the walls were gone. And I was looking, now you can look in and see some of the walls, and I can't tell if they're reproductions or if they're originals, but a lot of the actual building has been destroyed, and it's going to be turned into a fancy office space, etc. But that was a major battle, and I know a lot of organizations were very, very involved. But the demolition by neglect is a very powerful mechanism.
Yeah.
And also insane business owners or the little landmark district that has Chelsea's, I don't know if it's West 29th Street.
Oh, Lamartine Place?
Underground Railroad.
Yeah.
So that's
Lamartine
like
Place.
half a block. And these two women who lived in buildings in the adjacent land, the guy bought the building and began to put additions on. And it had been a perfect row of brownstones. And they bought it, and one of them happened to be somebody who taught history, was an historian. And she discovered it's an actual site. It was a Quaker family, Underground Railroad. And so based on that,
the only documented Underground Railroad stop in New York City.
in Manhattan, there are no
In
ones in
Manhattan.
Brooklyn, but there were many others that
Yeah,
were
we just
devastated, we just don't know where they are. But that battle went on for years after designation, because the man who owned the building was insane and had an equally insane lawyer, and they just kept building. I mean, so there are a lot of ways that you can damage and destroy landmark property. You can
And
also
sometimes demolition is as a result of accident, like the fire that killed, was it the Chelsea Croatian church a year or two ago?
Oh, yeah.
And it becomes an interesting inquiry for the owner of the building and its obligation to try to revive, a building that, not that they've neglected, but has been destroyed by fire. And should the commission be helping them, or not helping, but sort of giving them a break and allowing them, agreeing that it should be taken down as opposed to forcing the church to spend the money to put it back up?
Yeah. Church buildings are an interesting case all their own, because they're usually very resistant to being landmarked. Churches are very resistant, typically, to being landmarked.
Why?
Cellular air rights.
There are various reasons. They don't believe that, they worry that the congregation won't be able to pay for improvements to having to go through the landmarks process and things like that, and having the government,
But the Landmark Commission changes its personality and
yes,
personnel
exactly.
over time. So there are examples of just the facades of landmark churches being left, and then this giant high-rise built behind it. The Art Students League monstrosity, magnificent building that has been totally, I can't even look at it.
Yeah, I mean, you can even, when you leave here, if you go down 12th Street,
But also
West, there's the NYU building.
Collegiate Church in Murray Hill. I think that's the church that has a huge tower coming out of the top of it now.
yeah, there's some
and
interesting.
churches have air rights, and the whole issue of air rights is a very corrupted process
Yeah,
that a lot of people who care about the city, how do they get the right to build a building that high, it's because they're
Theoretically,
behind the
it
scenes.
allows these buildings to preserve their envelope.
But they
also
sell them to the
profit
big
for zoning.
developers who then, it's like putting together a group of trading cards and then you say, well, we're gonna build a 90-story building coming to your neighborhood. So the whole Sutton Place, I mean, all of these gigantic high-rises that Extel is building and other, you know, it's all been because there've been these back room putting together air rights.
Which is why we have organizations like HDC out there fighting the good fight.
You know, Webby has a budget of
Oh, yeah, exactly. Yeah, yeah,
And we're, you know,
yeah.
it's David, I like to think of us as David and Goliath.
Yes,
You know,
very much.
we're awake enough to aim our sights.
Yeah.
It's, you know, this is the worst time in terms of the number of buildings going up. There are some developers, smaller developers particularly, who have to, because it's in a historic district, that they can build a new building, and they have to go through the public process. So there are all kinds of areas for wiggle room and good communication and corruption.
I was just curious, who hires you?
Who hires me? Well, right now I'm working on a specific project, the New York City LGBT Historic Sites Project. So I've been with them for 3.5 years.
Is it a state-funded project?
Yeah, it's federal. It started as a federal grant in 2014 from the National Park Service, and then the founders of the project were able to match it with private grants, and then keep it going through that way.
What do you think you'll do after the project?
That's a good question. We have so much work just with this project. As long as we can keep it funded, because we're looking at all 5 boroughs, and I'm only just now getting to Jackson Heights, which has a really great history all its own.
What's the end result of the project? I'm sorry.
We have a website with it's a Google map, the 5 boroughs of New York. You click on pins. We're adding pins to the map. This is nothing to do with regulation. We research it and we decide to put it on there. We're not landmarking, as sometimes people think the map, like all these landmarks we're creating. That's not the case. But it's just we're writing more National Register nominations, adding more pins to the map, and we're actually embarking on a initiative with the Department of Education to bring this history into the public school curriculum at the high school level.
Unlike our other preservation school leaders, Amanda is not a board member on whom we can impose indefinitely. So